Here we start the first session today, and the second and the third sessions will occur tomorrow morning. I'm honored to have with us as main speakers. I'm honored to announce several persons as main speakers. Unfortunately, Mr. Eugen Orlando Teodorovici, the Minister of Public Finance, couldn't attend this meeting, but someone will speak on behalf of the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Daniel Botanoiu, Secretary of State, will speak on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture. We've got a video message from Commissioner Phil Hogan, Commissioner for Agriculture and Rural Development, and a message from Mr. Georg Hösler, Director in charge with Resources, DJ Agri and Rural Development, and Mr. Pekka Pesonen, Secretary General of Copa-Cogeca, will take the floor, as well as Mr. Jan Plag, the President of IFOAM Europe.
Primul vorbitor, o să dau cuvântul domnului secretar de stat din Ministerul Agriculturii.
I'll pass the floor now to Secretary of State Botanoiu. He has significant experience in farming. He's been Secretary of State since 2012, with a short break of a few months in 2016. You have the floor. Thank you, Chairman. It is an honor for me to be here with you today, and I'd like to welcome all our guests, some of them friends of ours whom I now see after many years. And again, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Government of Romania and the Ministry of Agriculture. Don't be upset because funding is delayed, because agriculture starts with work, and it's good to talk about the relation between farming and rural development. This highly important area is based on the number of pragmatic, factual things, and one of them is the budget allocated to agriculture in Europe. The budget, as you very well know, and as you've heard it said many times over, so the budget now, as planned, it is not matching the ambitions and targets that the Union envisages. We believe that significant steps have been taken, significant positive steps have been taken. For instance, external convergence of direct payments, which is one of the objectives that at least the Romanian farmers require from the Ministry of Agriculture to support in Europe. More specifically, the annual capping to 1.9 billion would meet the requests and needs for capital expenditure and the matching funds that farmers can provide. Applying the digression rule is also one of the important directions that makes this an important alternative measure in CAP. Moreover, the Ministry of Agriculture supports the efforts to simplify the CAP, because you know this is something that has been something that the EU has been striving for a while now. Another significant objective is related to young persons installing and farming, because today it is very difficult to get young people to relocate to rural areas, but it is even more difficult to keep them there. That is why I believe that our efforts should be converging and much thorougher, much stronger than they have been to date. Another measure is in particular related to research and development. No matter how many good measures we take, unless we have good practical, applicable results of research, we cannot talk about fair, coherent and long-term development of the farming sector in Europe. In terms of the objectives covered by the PAC, avoiding migration from rural areas, avoiding abandonment of farming, aging of farming population, responding to the current developments of the produce market, to the volatility and very often changes that occur in our countries. So in all these aspects, one thing is the volatility of prices. Prices change from day to day with high degrees of variation. Regarding the volatility of prices, we find that the agreements we've made and recognized in Europe on the embargo on Russia, actions we take to open up the markets and others of the like, have not always brought about the added value we would have liked to see in the European farming sector. Another important aspect that I'd like us to consider is that the reducing of the CAP budget will definitely lead to reduced interest of farmers in producing public goods, and encourage them to fail to comply, not to comply with the environmental conditions, because it would become impossible for farmers to meet all the environmental requirements. Considering the opportunity afforded to the farmers. Farmers today are the best environmental managers, and one of the critical elements that lead to a cleaner environment and more sustainable chances for the development of this sector. Reducing the CAP budget would further lead to neglecting the environmental requirements by farmers. In Romania, at least, we have two types of policies. One addressed to small farmers, because Romania currently has the highest degree of land fragmentation in Europe. At the payment agency, we have 860,000 applicants, farmers, and we have 13,000 large farms. Therefore, we have to implement two types of policies. One for small farmers who comply with the requirements. They are semi-subsistent farmers and, as I said, meet the applicable EU regulations on farming practices, ecological or environmental conditions, and so on. And on the other hand, we have the large farms, which are currently providing the markets with produce. We believe, therefore, that reducing the investments we make, reducing the amounts allocated to Pillar 2 of the CAP, would do nothing but make the work of these larger companies more difficult, and the burden would be further transferred to small and middle farms, which will not always be able to meet the new challenges. The transferring of money from the types of interventions from between the development fund and the guarantee fund would make farmers' burdens easier. A new model for delivering the CAP, including the monitoring of implementation based on simple and easily measurable solutions, is also an idea that decision makers should consider when they make the final decision in this area and for Europe. Also critical for Romanian farms is the coupled support both for animal and vegetable farming. Based on our latest experience, we've seen directed support schemes, for instance, allocated for tomatoes, and these targeted schemes brought back home from abroad about 600 young persons, Romanians, who used to live abroad. The money was not very consistent. There weren't a lot of money. However, whatever money we paid out, got these persons to come back and start farming tomatoes in Romania, leading to good supply of market and reduction of outwards migration, of emigration from Romania. Another important measure under the future PAC should be addressed to improving market mechanisms. Today, we are talking about a trifecta: market, partnership or association, and funding. Market, association, funding. All the three should be directed in a direction that would meet the interests and the needs of European citizens, because at the end of the day, they are the owners of farming business, because they are the ones who order, consume, and provide guidance for the future development of farming. Yet another important tool we are looking at is the renewal of generations, attracting new generations to farming, because otherwise we will never have continuity in farming. Attracting young people to rural areas and getting them to settle there permanently through targeted funding schemes that will allow them to remain in the countryside, that should be one of our priorities when we will eventually decide on the CAP budget. Romania has launched a discussion in Europe on the protein program. Romania currently has perhaps the best conditions for soy crops. In this context, the soy cultivated areas, which is a very important protein that Europe is now importing, as you know. We are importing 40 million tons of soy in Europe every year. So this essential protein can be produced in Europe. Romania can produce up to 4 million tons of soybeans, which would be added value for the European Union. So in this area, I think we can and should have targeted programs. When we are talking about protein, we are talking about a protein that is beneficial for the environment. That is, it fixates the organic nitrogen, which allows for the sustainability and maintaining the status of farms, of those farms where environmental requirements or conditions are complied with. Another request that we've put out is about mobilizing biomass. Today we have significant areas, agricultural areas, that we could use to the benefit of the consumers and European potential clients or users, and that would allow us to support these energy-rich crops. Since I don't want to go over the 10 minutes allocated to me, I should also refer to the mountain area programs. Currently, Romania has more than a third of farming land in mountain areas, and the same as other countries that signed the Carpathian Convention alongside Romania, we've been developing a number of targeted programs or schemes that might eventually lead to keeping the farmers in these mountain areas. Because if we have an issue with farmers, young farmers settling in the fields. In the mountains, this issue is even more serious because the living conditions there are much harsher than in the plains. Therefore, we believe that the three principles stated in the mountain schemes, that is the environment, training, creating and maintaining conditions for developing non-agricultural business, will eventually lead to increased attractivity of this area, of the mountain areas. Thanking you again for your attention and wishing you success in your activities, in your work and discussions. I hope I managed to keep it brief, and thank you again for listening. Thank you, Secretary of State. Next, we're going to have a video message from Commissioner Phil Hogan.
Dear Members of Parliament, please allow me to wish you the best of luck for your meeting today. Let me start by thanking the Romanian Presidency for your work in advancing the discussion on the future of the Common Agricultural Policy. As you know, the Commission presented its proposals to the co-legislators on the 1st of June 2018. Since then, both the Parliament and the Council have invested an enormous amount of effort in developing their respective positions. We greatly appreciate the work being undertaken by the Council and the Parliament, and we hope that both institutions will conclude their respective positions as soon as possible, with a view to starting interinstitutional negotiations on a final compromise that hopefully can be achieved later this year. We have consistently made the point that it is important to provide stability and certainty for our farmers. And the best way we can do this is through an agreement on the future of the CAP. At the same time, both the Council and the Parliament are working hard to advance the negotiations on the EU budget for 2021 to 2027. In an extremely challenging budgetary context, we feel the Commission made a fair and reasonable proposal, maintaining a strong budget for agriculture. Protecting €365 billion for the CAP means that 96% of every euro paid to farmers from 2014 to 2020 is safeguarded, and this is safeguarded going towards 2027. And I want to assure you that I am fighting hard to bring that missing 4% back into play. I welcome Romania's support for this position. And now the ball is in the court of the EU member states. Indeed, at the last December European Council, our leaders endorsed the aim of reaching political agreement on the future EU budget by the autumn of 2019. This will be essential to paving the way for finalising the CAP negotiations and to ensure a smooth transition to the next period. Let me also say a brief word on our plan to modernise and simplify the policy. The key innovation in our proposal is a new delivery model, which is designed to achieve more results while making the policy simpler for our farmers and our national administrations. A common EU policy will be maintained, but Member States will be given far more flexibility to better target their measures in line with their needs. Each Member State must design a CAP strategic plan, explaining how they will meet 9 key EU-level objectives: 3 economic, 3 social and 3 environmental. And within this common framework at EU level, our Member States will be able to design intervention strategies using an EU-level menu of tools and adapting them to their particular local circumstances. The Commission will maintain a strong watchdog role. We will work closely with Member States to make sure their plans are on track, and we'll take remedial action where necessary. So this new delivery model is also designed to strongly support a new generation of farmers. Many important policy areas relating to young farmers are controlled at national level, such as taxation and land use. But in our new delivery model, the Member States will have to spell out in their plans how they intend to stimulate generational renewal, using both European and national tools. This means that our young farmers can be supported in a far deeper way than can be done from Brussels alone. Our young farmers will benefit from a wide range of instruments, some of which will be mandatory and some voluntary, including at least 2% of all Member States' direct payments envelope will have to be dedicated to supporting young farmers. There will also have to be an increase in the maximum amount of installation aid paid to young farmers, which will be up to €100,000. And we will continue to invest in knowledge transfer and training. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to wish you the best of luck in your event, and I look forward to hearing the outcome of your discussions. Thank you.
Da, îi mulțumim.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we pass the floor to Director Georg Hösler, who is Director in charge of resources in the General Directorate for Agriculture and Rural Development. Director, I don't envy you for your task today because you'll have to answer all the questions about CAP. Thank you. You have the floor.
Chairman, to give me the floor. I would like to maybe build on what the Commissioner just said and go a little bit deeper with regard to the next financial framework, because this is what I have been asked to do today, to talk about finances and to talk about the possibilities to maintain a strong budget for the Common Agriculture Policy. First of all, maybe to emphasize what the Commissioner said just a moment ago about the difficult circumstances in which this proposal has been made last year. Obviously, what we have to bear in mind is that there's a strong political message from our member states and from the European Parliament to emphasize new policies with European investment. Just to name a few of them, fight terrorism, protection of our EU borders, a new defense policy, and of course research and innovation, which remains to be one of our main objectives for the future policies financed through EU budget. Now, of course, all these new areas will request a certain amount of money. And this is what indeed the Commission has proposed last year, to add some substantial budget to these new areas. And of course that is in a certain extent in conflict with the two policies we are discussing here today and tomorrow, the cohesion policy and the common agriculture policy, because as it stands now, those two policies still represent close to 70% of the EU budget. So everything which needs to be done, which needs to be modified in this budget, of course there will be a strong influence on those two policies. Now, I also need to make a reference to a very difficult general political situation we are facing with regard to the EU budget, which is there is a certain antagonism in policy making between, we call it the club of the net payers. So there are a number of member states who would like to limit the EU expenditure to a bare minimum. You know that there was this 1% of the GDP floating last year from certain member states, from an important group of member states. You know we have made a proposal which represents 1.1% of the GDP. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the European Parliament, which has in its resolution in November, which has been mentioned already this afternoon, proposed a 1.3% budget of the GDP, which is the difference between those is enormous. Just to talk about agriculture, it makes a difference of 67 billion euros, the proposal of the European Commission and the proposal of the European Parliament. So to make it very short, the Commission, when making this proposal, is, as they say, between a rock and a hard place. It's very difficult to find a balance between those two extreme positions. Now, the final big elephant in the room when we talk about budget these days, of course, is Brexit. It has been briefly mentioned this afternoon already. You know that Brexit, as we speak here today, is not clear what is going to happen, under which conditions the UK is leaving the Union. This will, of course, have notably an impact on the current MFF, but in an extreme scenario, the leaving of the United Kingdom in, say, without a deal might also have an important impact on the new MFF. And you know this current MFF the new MFF proposal, which was based on EU 27 member states, took out the UK, and this fact means that there is basically a loss of 12 billion euros per year. Now, all these put together, I believe, make our proposal relatively reasonable, also with regard to agriculture. I hear the Secretary of State who says it's not ambitious enough. I hear President Stanescu saying it's not ambitious enough, but I think under these circumstances, it is a rather good basis for the discussion. Now, what has been in the center of the debate when we made this proposal was to basically try to maintain as much as possible the direct payments. On average, nobody will lose more than 4% in the next period. But more importantly, with the direct payments, we have made a proposal in two areas which are politically very important. Number one, the convergence, meaning that those member states who have joined the union later, that the gap between the average direct payments in these member states and the average direct payments in the union should decrease, and we have made an important proposal in this context. And I think particularly for Romania, there is indeed an increase in direct payments foreseen for the next 7 years. But here again, it's not a secret. You have been following the discussions in the European Parliament, but more importantly in the Council of Agricultural Ministers. There are a number of ministers who do not agree to this proposal in convergence, and I think there will be a lot of room of political discussions over the next months to find an agreement on this basis. The second important element, which is related to direct payments, is the digressivity. Secretary of State, you have mentioned it. We have made a proposal, digressive payments as of 60,000 euros, direct payments per farm, a cap of 100,000 euros, of course taking into account labor costs on the farms, which can be deducted. Now, this proposal is a centerpiece of our proposal for the reform of the MFF. Here again, there are important discussions. A number of member states, and I understand Romania as well, has certain issues with these proposals, but I think we will have a very interesting discussion when it comes to the decision. Now, for other sectors, I think we have also been relatively reasonable. Other sectors meaning the market support measures for areas like wine or fruit and vegetables and others, where there is only a relatively modest reduction of 4% as well. Now, I think maybe to spend a few moments on the area of rural development. Contrary to what also has been presented this afternoon here, we are not proposing a cut of rural development. What we are proposing in our proposal is to rebalance the financing of rural development measures between member states and the European Union. The prevailing percentage at the moment is 53% European Union, 47% member states, and of course 85% for less developed regions. We are proposing to reduce the co-financing rate of the European Union and to increase the national co-financing of these measures. We believe we have good reasons to make this proposal, particularly for the less developed regions. These co-financing rates have been set when we have been in a financial crisis. I think this situation has been overcome now. And as far as the normal regions are concerned, to have a more even burden sharing between member states and the EU budget seems to be reasonable in the current context. And of course, with the objective to maintain the current level of financing under rural development measures for the farmers and the beneficiaries of the rural development policy. You know, there are also important provisions with regard to flexibility between rural development policy and direct payments. We have made good experience in this current framework that member states use this flexibility. Some member states put more emphasis on rural development than others. Others believe that the direct payments are better targeted to support the agricultural sector. So that's the reason why we increase here the flexibility for member states to do the necessary for the sector. You mentioned it briefly in your introduction. We have made an important increase in financing of research and innovation in agriculture, which is outside the CAP budget. We are proposing 10 billion euros for the new period. This is both because in the current period when this was introduced, the financing for innovation and research in the agricultural sector, it has been an extremely successful program. The uptake is very good. And secondly, we also consider it's the right political message for the agricultural sector to move away from simple income transfer more towards an innovative, modern, dynamic agriculture which uses the possibility the EU budget can offer. Now, what is important now is, of course, timing. You know, when we made this proposal last year, the Commission was very much insisting that we should have reached an agreement before the European elections in order to be able to present a positive project in the European elections. That was unfortunately not possible for various political reasons. Again, I mention here Brexit because it has an important influence on these discussions. But now the European Council has made a commitment to find an agreement in autumn 2019. I believe that's still okay. The timing is still okay, but that is really then kind of the ultimate time when an agreement needs to be found, simply because we need a certain time for the new programming period in agriculture. And, of course, what was mentioned already and what was mentioned now by the Commissioner, we still don't have an agreement on the reform of the CAP. Now, it is clear from past experience, the Council of Agricultural Ministers and the European Parliament are not agreeing on a new reform or on a reform of the sector without knowing how much budget they will have at their disposal. That is natural, that is clear, which means the timing issue becomes even more important for the coming months. Now, to sum up here, I think we have something on the table which can easily be presented as a good proposal for the agricultural sector. You know that the presidency, now the Romanian presidency in the MFF negotiating box, has worked on a proposal where the only thing which is basically missing, not only for the agricultural sector, for the whole MFF, are the figures. So I think the institutions are ready to discuss the final distribution of the money for the future budget. I believe the proposal is balanced. I believe that all these new priorities I mentioned in the beginning also need a certain funding, and on this basis we can find a reasonable outcome which then will have good support for the agricultural sector and a planned and planifiable future for the agricultural sector for the next 7 years. Thank you, Chairman.
Da, vă mulțumim mult, domnule.
Thank you, Director. We pass the floor now to Mr. Pekka Pesonen. He is Secretary General of the Committee of Professional Agricultural Organizations and that of the General Confederation of Agricultural Cooperatives. Secretary General, you've got the floor now.
Technology. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a pleasure to be here today, and I would like to warmly thank you for the kind invitation to take part in this important event. I'm Finnish by nationality. I come from a long line of Finnish farmers. I'm 10th generation of my family on my home farm, and despite the fact that I'm not an active farmer, I'm very much into the rural community of my own, and also in addition to having 67 member organizations for COPA, for European farmers, and Cohesion for European agri-cooperatives, we are very much into the agricultural business directly. We, of course, like many speakers have already pointed out, Brexit, we're desperate in looking into our short-term prospects. We are going to lose one of our biggest members, but more importantly, we are going to face an unprecedented crisis in the marketplace if we have this divorce in unmanaged, uncontrolled way. So therefore, we are looking into the immediate future of European farming community with some concerns. Nevertheless, we represent European farmers, roughly speaking 10 million farmers in total, out of which 6 million farmers apply for support. And in addition to that, 22,000 agricultural cooperatives that represent, roughly speaking, 40 to 50% of the agricultural output reaching the market. Also, when it comes to closed sectors that we have in our ranks, for instance, forestry carries a significant weight in our policy portfolio. I think the timing for your event is crucial. We are looking into the EU decision-making now, like the previous speakers pointed out, and in particular Mr. Häusler from the Commission. The timetable is fairly well known, and we certainly understand the Commission concerns in terms of the MFF and having the budgetary resources available before we go into any specific policy orientation. We fully support an EU budget that provides the means to achieve not only the objectives of the treaty for the functioning of the European Union, but also the ambitions and priorities for the future EU 27. And this ranges from climate change to various sectorial policy issues that we need to enhance. It also means a more ambitious budget that requires a higher level of commitment by member states, and that is one of the reasons that I was pleased to receive an invitation to this event. It is fundamental that the Union's challenges and priorities are matched with the necessary financial resources. Member states must contribute to this through an increase in their contributions, and we have no illusions how easy or difficult that would be in the current economic climate. I would like to stress that the future EU budget must not undermine nor put at stake the current common policies such as the CAP, and I believe that I can also say that when it comes to cohesion policy. This must not happen at the time when the sector is expected to deliver much more in terms of sustainability and viable rural areas. COPA and Cohesion call for the maintenance of the EU agricultural spending. Maintaining the CAP budget in real terms, which indeed means, in fact, increasing the CAP budget, may be challenging for us all, but this would correspond to the challenges that our sector is facing. We believe that this is the only way to ensure that the EU meets its increasingly ambitious targets for the environment, climate, competitiveness, growth, and jobs. And this is also what the Commissioner Hogan pointed out. In this respect, we understand the uncertainties that Brexit is causing and its consequences in the decision-making. We would nevertheless like to stress that an agreement on the future MFF must come before an agreement on the future CAP. The CAP is a cornerstone of the construction of the European Union, and it must remain strong, common, and adequately financed policy. Indeed, common agricultural policy is a success story. Despite its flaws, it has delivered significant benefits for all European citizens: food security, vitality of rural areas, and contribution to environmental challenges. We welcome the European Commission's effort to modernize and simplify the CAP. You know that as we meet here, co-legislators of the Union continue to work on the Commission's proposal for the future CAP. However, there are still very many issues that need to be clarified. I already pointed out the budget. We would oppose any cuts. We need additional funding to deliver the objectives of the CAP priorities. We often hear the mantra, public money for public goods. Well, the CAP is already an excellent example of implementation of such principle. We produce excellent food, fiber, and renewables, and we are doing it in an increasingly sustainable manner. And this is increasingly also recognized internationally. The current proposals also call for a significant reduction of rural development funds, as well as decrease in EU co-financing rates. Besides creating imbalances between member states, this will have a strong impact on our ability to achieve not only the CAP objectives, but also the EU's international commitments, and climate change once again being one of them. We strongly oppose these cuts. Another critical element is simplification. The CAP must become easier to use, especially for the farmers, not only to the administration. And its controls and sanctions must be simpler and more proportional. The current proposals do not go far enough in our view. In COPA and COSECA, we have supported performance-based approach if it brings in easier administration and if it helps farmers to better reach for the environmental benefits. Let us see if this model delivers its deliverables as its promises. This brings me to a new delivery model in general and the CAP strategic plans. We must safeguard the communality of the policy. This is the cornerstone of the CAP itself. As a common EU policy, the common CAP must be based on the common EU rules. And I think also the Commissioner recognized this, but we need to see this maintained. We recognize the need to provide member states with some degree of flexibility. However, member states must ensure that they adopt a balanced approach to all three pillars of sustainability when designing their strategic plans. In addition, the future CAP needs to seriously consider the future investments in agriculture and the innovations that we will need to feed Europe's future. The ability to attract investment, like any sector, any other sector than agriculture, is crucial for the future of our businesses to our cooperatives. This requires stability and the tools to adequately manage risk. When I think about tomorrow's agriculture, I feel that my mind focuses on the fact that only 11% of all farmers are younger than 40 years of age. We desperately need these new brilliant minds, both women and men. And ladies and gentlemen, may I underline the word women. Imagine any future for our family farming. There's no future for family farming if women are not part of this picture. They are very much a part of the investment needed, that innovative approach, and we certainly underline this, for instance, later this week in our own events in Spain, where we bring women and young farmers to our cooperative discussion. We are there to fight for better future for also the rural communities, not only for agriculture. And this is where the CAP and the cohesion policies would actually bring in the synergies that we so desperately need, especially in areas such as digital agenda, where those new businesses, not only agriculture, will be given an opportunity in rural areas to prosper. Without an adequate set of tools for the next generation of farmers, I fear we will witness a real shortage of active farmers. Consequently, we will not be able to deliver on environment and climate commitments. Ladies and gentlemen, I challenge you, each in your national parliament, to take a look. How can we ensure that we get new blood to agriculture? How can we bring those young people, once again, both women and men, to rural areas to make the necessary investments? And this, once again, is the collaborative action of all policies, not only at European level, but also at national level, where you carry a significant impact to the livelihoods of rural areas. Coming back to the CAP, COPA and COSECA also welcome the Commission's proposal to allow producer organizations to be expanded as a tool for intervention in the market in other sectors. Recognizing the specificities of the agriculture sector and allowing farmers to work collectively to pursue their economic objectives are two essential prerequisites for strengthening the position of farmers in the food supply chain. Within the CAP national plans, measures targeting investments and innovation recognized POs and cooperatives beyond the SME threshold must be also eligible for support. The diversity of European agriculture, its culinary heritage, and consumers' expectations lead to quality differentiation as a strategic goal. This is what European farmers and their agri-cooperatives do in an effort to improve added value, efficiency, and competitiveness. The CAP must therefore provide different ways to promote quality policy. To achieve this, quality must also be highlighted when developing the CAP strategic plans, considering that it contributes to boost our competitiveness and meet consumer expectations. Together with the strong EU quality policy, the EU promotion policy is an excellent tool to enhance the competitiveness of our sector. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the years, it has proved to be a very important instrument for European farmers and agri-cooperatives to increase consumers' awareness of the high quality and added value of our products and merits of EU agriculture. I feel very confident by saying that the quality and safety of our food in Europe is at its highest level in whole of our known history. Let's make that good performance to work for those rural communities and especially rural families. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vă mulțumim, domnule Pekka Pesson.
Thank you, Mr. Pekka Pessonen. Pass the floor now to Mr. Jan Plage, who is the president of IFOAM Europe, an umbrella association for organic farming and foods. He'll come back in June for the European Congress on Biofoods. President, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the invitation here to Bucharest. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are very deep in several parts of society, farming, food industry sectors, and the discussion of the future of the Common Agricultural Policy. Myself, I'm currently the chairman of the Civil Dialogue Group on CAP from the European Commission, discussing with more than 50 stakeholders all over Europe the last years, together with the Commission and many experts, the development of the Commission proposal and now the political discussions between the co-legislators and the implementation of the CAP strategic plans. So this is my background. On the other side, I'm a horticultural farmer. I have a small horticultural farm in North Germany, I cultivate together with my brother. An organic farm, certainly. Let me emphasize on the key question of today, what we discuss on budget, on CAP budget, on the MFF. What is the position and the dialogue between organic farmers, between the food industry, retailers, traders, which the IFOAM group represent more than 200 organizations all over Europe. And we discussed the last 3-4 years, the lessons learned on the current CAP period, the last CAP reforms, and the needs for the next period. We are strongly committed and convinced to a strong CAP budget. As Pekka Pessonen from Copa-Cogeca says, and Mr. Țănescu and all other speakers today said, we need a strong CAP budget if we want to achieve the European targets. The 9 targets are ambitious, especially the environmental and the social targets. We are firmly against a reduction of the CAP budget in the FFF. It is completely unrealistic to address so many challenges which we are facing in the agricultural sector. We can't fulfill the climate goals, the needs of preserving the biodiversity, the depopulation of the land, or the declining wages on many farms with less money. This is not possible. So this is our basic position and a clear answer to the negotiations of member states with the Commission and the Parliament. But there is another aspect. It is easy to say we need more money. And we first have to discuss how much money is in the budget. We strongly believe at the other side it is now the time to discuss intensively what is in the budget, what is the content, for which measures, interventions do we need more money or at least a stable budget. The budget is directly connected to the content. If the CAP delivers all the public goods we want to deliver, there would have been no real political need to decrease the budget, and the competition of taxpayers' money in Europe would have been the result that the farmers need the budget to deliver all the public goods which are asked for by society. And we have seen the public consultation made by the European Commission that many farmers and many citizens don't believe that the CAP delivers all what is needed and all what is inside the envelope of the European targets. And it decreases a lot of confidence and trust from farmer societies, from the civil society, when the Commission proposed again, after the last reductions of the rural development programs, the second pillar, again a big cut of up to 25% in some member states, even more compared to the current CAP when adjusting to inflation. So this is a real negative sign, because all scientists and a lot of discussions in civil society really remark that the second pillar and the rural development is crucial for delivering more public goods and more stability in the rural areas. So the key recommendation on the FFF proposal is to keep an overall CAP budget, maintain it at the current level, at least like it is today. I think there are a lot of other stakeholders who share this position. But on content, as I said before, we can't disconnect the CAP budget discussion from the content. And there the EU Commission made a lot of valuable proposals in the legislative proposal done in 2018. First, the eco-schemes. The eco-schemes are a first step to have a common framework for payments for public goods in the first pillar and in the second pillar. So a discussion which lasts already quite long, how we get a clear common architecture to incentivize more delivery from farmers to public goods, to biodiversity, to climate protection, animal welfare, etc., is now possible. It is possible if the member states choose a transfer to these measures of eco-schemes or of interventions in the second pillar. But it is not inside of the proposal. The eco-schemes are mandatory to deliver it in the CAP strategic plan, but there is no quantity, no ring fencing, no share of the first pillar or of the whole national CAP budget allocated to eco-schemes. And if we share the different situations in the member states using environmental measures, environmental payments in the second pillar, there is a very huge difference between the member states. For example, organic farming today is measure 11 is included in the payments of the second pillar. And we know that many member states even reduced their budget in the second pillar and reduced their share of payments in the second pillar for environmental and climate protection. So it's not a common direction what the member states offer the farmers to choose for measures. And what we and many other organizations of civil society fear is a clear race to the bottom when the Commission proposal comes into force. And it's up to the member state now to discuss how we can reach a level playing field of the new green architecture. What we propose is to ring-fence a common budget over all two pillars and not a single ring-fenced budget like we have it proposed now in the second pillar for environmental payments. In the first pillar, there is no ring-fenced budget now. So we will harvest in the CAP strategic plan a huge range how to reach the European targets with many, many different payment models. And this brings a race to the bottom because it is the easiest payment scheme just to fulfill the income support and to pay direct payments in the first pillar. This is the easiest way to spend money. And it's much more ambitious, like we heard yesterday, some member states saying they want to decrease the direct payments and they want to invest in eco schemes and in cooperative, for example, in cooperative biodiversity measures for corporations of farmers. So there will be a competition how to fulfill the European targets. This sounds good, this sounds reasonable, but it's just working if the budget allocation is more or less on a level playing field all over Europe. If this is not possible, we have already tabled from the European Parliament several ideas to solve this gap in the Commission proposal. And one is not to ring-fence the overall environmental payments in the CAP, is at least to ring-fence the eco schemes so that every member state is able on a minimum spending to develop this important intervention. So at the end, considering organic farming in the CAP strategic plan, it is not mentioned today that it's mandatory that organic farming is part of the CAP strategic plan, like it is today as measure 11 in the rural development. If you discuss a more performance and scientific proved farming system which delivers a lot of environmental, social and economical results, if you discuss connected measures from farmers and society, if you discuss beyond political camps in all member states an administrative easy intervention which is ongoing on improvement, then organic farming is a European success story in almost all member states. And we really ask you to discuss with your governments, in your parliaments and committees, that organic farming is a mandatory element of all CAP strategic plans in all 27 EU member states. Yeah, last but not least, we are united as organic, as farmers all over Europe, together in the value chain. And we are really happy to be the guest of the European Council presidency in June in Bucharest here. And we all invite you to be here and discuss the future of organic farming 20th to 21st of June. It will happen here in Bucharest in the Parliament under the European presidency. Thank you a lot, and I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Vă mulțumim, domnule președinte.
Thank you, President Plug. Dear friends, the list of the main speakers is over, and here we pass to the second part of this session, that is exchanges. And 9 colleagues already enlisted to take the floor. I propose that each of you speak for 3 minutes to be on time, and to allow in the end the main speakers to draw the main conclusions. To start with, will you please allow me to say a few words, to say a few conclusions, and then I invite Mrs. Karula Kafantari to take the floor, a representative of the Greek Parliament.
Politica
The common agricultural policy has become an important pillar in the architecture of the EU. The European citizens, recognizing how important it is, the proposals presented on the 1st of June 2018 by the European Commission include a new CAP model for the 2021-2027 period, in which the member states would be more flexible to tailor their decisions and to adapt them to the local circumstances. The budget of the CAP post-2020 is a priority for our country because of the contribution that the Romanian agriculture has got in the national GDP, and of the fact that roughly 45% of the Romanian population lives in the rural environment. Moreover, 2018 was a real success for us, as there were record crops for corn and sunflower, bringing Romania on the first place in the EU. Romania is the signatory of the memorandum on the CAP budget with Finland, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Croatia, Cyprus, Hungary, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Poland, and Slovakia, requiring the CAP budget to be increased to put it again to the current level, allowing the farmers to cope with the economic stakes and the environment stakes. In other words, we don't agree with the Commission's proposal for the future CAP, assuming a reduction of the way of money assigned for agriculture of the overall EU budget, that is 28.5% compared to 37% in the current MFF. In this respect, we consider we need to take into account aspects such as the contribution of the farmers for the public goods, the minimal requirements in the eco-conditionality field, additional requirements for farmers in the field of climate and the environment, the agriculture's contribution to the food security, and the difference between salaries in agriculture compared to the average salaries in other fields. The cutting of the agricultural budget will seriously affect the CAP, the most integrated European policy, and the farmers will need to make more for environment with much reduced funds. And the farmers already have revenues reduced by 40% compared to other social categories. There will be disparities between the Eastern and Western Union, as well as impacts on the environment measures financing. Romania doesn't agree with the national co-financing of the direct payments, considering this will incur an unfair competition between the member states, and we cannot agree with the mandatory threshold for direct payments. Romania's priorities for the CAP budget past 2020 regards the maintaining of a consistent budget, existing of 2 pillars, external convergence, rethinking of greening payments, redistributive payment as an alternative for the threshold mechanism for large farms, a more consistent financing for research and innovation for agriculture, as well as the rethinking of tools for managing risks. We also need an increased flexibility by applying internal convergence by the payment mechanism and introducing the obligation of the national strategic plan, while the indicators for measuring performance of the CAP objectives need to be quantifiable, easily to measure, not to burden the farmers more than that. We welcome the continuation of the external convergence of the direct payments and the implementation of the orientation of the cuts towards small and average farms. To conclude, I am confident that during those 2 days of conference we'll have fruitful discussions to design the future CAP so that the member states can cope with the post-2020 budget to cut the risks regarding the viability of the agricultural farms, the revenues of the agricultures, and their capacity of coping with the requirements in terms of healthy food and climate changes. Thank you. I now pass the floor to Mrs. Harula Kafantari from the Greek Parliament.
I'd like to thank Romanian hosts for their excellent hospitality and the organization of this meeting. This parliamentary meeting is truly crucial because the role of the national parliaments in shaping the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, is very important. The chance that we have to exchange opinions on experiences and ideas based on each country's specific conditions is really significant. For example, Greece, with its particular geomorphologic characteristics and the numerous of islands, the mountains, and all this cannot be treated in the same way as other EU countries when forming specific policies. Consequently, the external convergence of direct aid should be subject to an explicit assessment of the criteria. I emphasize the need to maintain a common and integrated EU agricultural policy in order to safeguard agricultural income, social cohesion, regional development and protection on the environment as well as consumers. We do not agree on reducing the CAP funding. Greece believes that direct payments funding should focus on small and medium-sized farms, young people who want to enter the agricultural economy, and those with low incomes. On May 2018, they signed a memorandum by Greece, Finland, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain, and backed by another 8 countries, which asks increase of the CAP budget to reach at least its current levels. This will help farmers to respond to the economy, environmental, climatic, and health challenges imposed by the 2 pillars of CAP. It is made clear simultaneously that any future expenditure cuts on CAP budget will stress the hazards imposed on the viability of European farming establishment. This will affect negatively the farmers' income and their ability to cope not only with the growing demand for healthy, sustainable, quality food production, but also for environmental protection and the fight against climate change. At least I want to say that our Prime Minister, Mr. Alexis Tsipras, has made a series of proposals that could allow the CAP budget to be brought back to its current level by finding new own resources without further burdening our citizens. He proposed introducing a tax on financial transactions and on major internet companies. Thank you.
Vă mulțumim. Urmează doamna.
Thank you. Next, Mrs. Fotini Armapazzi from the Greek Parliament. Then Mr. Sari Kumara from the Finnish Parliament.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear members of the European and national parliaments, I'm very glad to participate in today's session. And I will try to be as brief as possible, stating the core position of my party, which is the main opposition party in the Greek Parliament, member of EPP, regarding common agricultural policy budget post-2020. We strongly disagree with the Commission's proposal for the next MFF, which would entail substantial cuts to CAP. Moreover, we disagree with the Commission's approach of providing two calculation methods for the MFF, current versus constant. The Commission has proposed severe cuts to CAP, 5% overall, 4% for direct payments, and around 15% for second pillar. These cuts, expressed in current values, do not take the impact of inflation into account. Thus, the real impact will be much harsher. For us, CAP, as a cornerstone of the construction of European Union, must remain a strong, common, and adequately financed policy. That's why, from the first moment, we call for keeping CAP's budgetary allocation at least at the same level as it is now, particularly with regard to my country, Greece, where the revenue farmers suffered a mighty blow. Given the fundamental role of this policy, we reaffirm our view that agriculture must not suffer financially as a result of political decisions such as Brexit or the funding of new European policies, which are, of course, sadly unavoidable. But CAP plays a crucial role in delivering key EU objectives, such as food security, while we point out that the regulations with which farmers must comply, governing food, health, and environmental protection, have become even more numerous and strict, while the relative share of agriculture in the EU budget keeps declining. The so-called logic, doing more with less. Regarding the debate which took place on the level of CAP support per hectares in Member States and the request of some Member States to harmonise that level across the EU, the so-called external convergence, we reiterate that any further external convergence is the wrong direction to take for the CAP review. To our mind, the level of CAP support needs to take into account the following: GDP and growth recession ratios, and not hectares and populations criteria. For us, even the current mild scenario proposal, which aims to close 50% of the existing gap between the current average Member States' direct payment level and to reach 90% of the EU average of direct payments from 2021 to 2027, would be very burdensome for Greek farmers. To conclude, further reductions are not acceptable and should not be allowed for the purpose of redistribution among Member States. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Member of Parliament. Then Mr. Kari Kurmala from the Finnish Parliament, and Mr. Giacomino Tarico should prepare to take the floor. You have the floor.
Distinguished committee chair, ladies and gentlemen, little about CAP reform and the Finnish EU presidency. We are in the middle of very important and also turbulent times for the EU. EU's rotating presidency really proves its role as a stabilizing force today. Thank you, Romania, for all the work you have done so far, and we wish you all the best for the rest of your presidency. In the second half of this year, Finland's EU presidency hits right to the middle of the institutional transition into EU. The Europe Council decided in December that we aim to reach a result in the EU's multi-annual financial framework, MFF, during the second part of this year, which means our presidency period. We, as the presidents, will do everything to fulfill this objective, recognizing. However, at the same time, the multiple challenges linked to this goal. The result in the MFF negotiation would bring much needed certainty and stability to the farming sector. It would also unlock the sectoral negotiation, especially for the MFF-related parts of the legislation. A couple of discussions on those points could be possible during our presidency. Romania has taken forward the CAP discussions and is still aiming at a partial general approach on all CAP proposals in June. Finland supports Romania in this and wishes all the success in the attempt. Unfortunately, the current European Parliament won't vote in the plenary sessions on its position on the CAP proposals. There will be only a committee vote. This means that the negotiations with the EP will start only after the new EP has started its work and decided on its position on the proposals. If the new EP reaches a solution on its positions quite soon in 2019, it could be possible to start trilogies already during our presidency. In this case, the Croatian presidency could be in a position to finalize the legislation during the first half of 2020. It is clear that the CAP negotiation will take time and the original timetable is not possible to reach. It seems evident that we need a transition period before the new CAP can start. The Commission has not given any timetable for the proposal on transitional rules, but we expect it to come to our table during our presidency. Finally, I would like to wish you all welcome to the next meeting in Helsinki on 27 and 28 of October under the theme CAP 2020 from Agreement to Settlement. Thank you.
Vă mulțumim, domnule.
Thank you, Mr. Kurmala. Next, Mr. Giacomino Tarico from the Italian Senate. Mr. Joachim Barreto should prepare from Portugal. Senator, you have the floor.
Grazie Presidente, anch'io ringrazio a nome della delegazione italiana per l'invito. Paventato dalla proposta della Commissione, e lo facciamo perché se è vero che da una parte la coesione è il tema centrale per il futuro dell'Unione, crediamo che sia altrettanto vero che per interi territori il futuro dell'agricoltura porta in sé il futuro della coesione e dello sviluppo e della tenuta sociale di quei territori. Luce delle sfide che la stessa Commissione ha posto al centro del futuro nella catena del valore della filiera dell'agricoltura, le sfide al cambiamento climatico, biodiversità, sicurezza alimentare, hanno bisogno di risorse ma crediamo che immaginare, come ha fatto la Commissione, che questo si possa ottenere aumentando la contribuzione degli Stati membri, crediamo sia molto difficile, soprattutto per quei paesi che già sono contributori netti. Da questo punto di vista ci sentiamo di sottolineare la necessità di esperire tutte le verifiche possibili per capire i termini e le modalità per addivenire ad un aumento di risorse attraverso mezzi ed entrate proprie dell'Unione Europea. Veniva già detto prima da alcuni colleghi il tema del web o altre forme comunque che siano di recupero di mezzi propri, anche per una questione, oserei dire, di legittimazione d'immagine della stessa Unione Europea. Nel merito alcune considerazioni puntuali. Noi crediamo che il tema della semplificazione sia fondamentale, come è stato detto, ma non soltanto per quel che riguarda la gestione da parte dei singoli Stati membri, ma una semplificazione che ricada puntualmente sulle aziende agricole, sugli agricoltori. Da questo punto di vista il tema della semplificazione è un tema di procedure, di modalità che deve calarsi sulle aziende agricole proprio per vedere le politiche dell'Unione Europea come politiche amiche delle aziende agricole. Un'altra considerazione, il tema della flessibilità che è stata paventata come accompagnamento al taglio delle risorse, cioè la possibilità che gli Stati membri possano cofinanziare in modo diversificato, noi crediamo debba essere valutata con molta attenzione perché rischia di innescare non solo una competizione tra paesi, ma soprattutto una competizione tra quei paesi per i quali l'agricoltura è centrale e strategica e quei paesi nei quali invece l'agricoltura è solo una delle componenti economiche che rischiano di vedersi ulteriormente marginalizzati e accantonati. Da questo punto di vista crediamo che questo tipo di valutazione debba essere fatta in modo molto puntuale. Ultima considerazione, noi crediamo che il tema dell'innovazione sia strategico per il futuro, ma lo è non soltanto per i giovani nelle aziende agricole, è centrale e strategico per tutte le aziende agricole.
Acum se aprinde, dar ar trebui să dau engleză. Înțelegi?
Tanto le nuove aziende giovani. Grazie.
I want to ensure that your intervention will be translated on the internet. And we now pass the floor to Mr. Joaquim Barreto from Portugal, and Mr. Jean-Baptiste Moreau from France is the next speaker. You have the floor, sir. President, dear colleagues, please allow me to start by thanking you for organizing this conference and for your warm welcome. For Portugal as well as for Romania, the Common Agricultural Policy is an important topic. An important topic not only for the future of our country, but also for the future of the European Union. We are therefore honored to accept this invitation of yours, and our delegation is made of members of 3 committees from Portugal. The Agricultural Committee, the European Affairs Committee, the Economy, Innovation and Public Works Committee. And as far as the CAP funds are concerned, the Portuguese Parliament has got a clear position. Portugal needs a common agricultural policy to maintain the budget to at least at that level, at least the current multi-annual financial framework. Portugal cannot accept a 13% cut of this budget for the second pillar, because for us, such funds are around 5% of the funds received in the CAP context. In Portugal, most farms are made of small family farms. And given this context, under such circumstances, the rural development policy is very much important. This is why it should be preserved by allowing our farmers to keep their farms viable from an economic point of view, by also coping with the environmental and climate changes as well as health stakes. Otherwise, we'll be witnessing rural areas being certified as being endangered. Here end my intervention by wishing the Romanian presidency of the EU Council best of wish, and I thank you again for this initiative. Thank you. Thank you, sir. We now pass the floor to Mr. Jean-Baptiste Moreau from France and Mr. Martin Prender from the Federal Council of Austria. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for organizing this very important meeting. We shouldn't close our eyes regarding the budget of the CAP. Brexit will have an important impact on the overall budget, but such impact should only be limited to the impact of Brexit and not go beyond it towards the CAP budget. This budget is very important, but beyond it we need to have the big picture over the food industry policy. Agricultural farms, and especially the small and middle-sized ones, are so important. This is why we appreciate the topics chosen, because we currently need to ensure the protection at the European level of our model made of agricultural farms, and it's important that the common agricultural policy protects the common farms. This is also a matter of common willingness to go in the same direction. The direct budget convergence is important. We agree such convergence if it is made in parallel with the fiscal and tax convergence to stop dumping on the market. Given the simplification of this CAP, we shouldn't experience a new renationalizing of a CAP, as it was the case with the first proposal from the Commission. We shouldn't have an a la carte CAP. Nationalization will not cause a better solution. CAP is as important, according to us, as the budget itself. Establishing thresholds for the CAP is important for preserving the current agricultural model. Investors, in the case of the large farms, don't need a maximal amount of aid from the CAP to survive. They are investors, they invest to earn money. They don't necessarily need funds from the CAP. To conclude, I'd like to remind the position of our President, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, who in his recent speech said that the common agricultural policy needs to be based on transforming our agricultural model towards a more sustainable model, considering the climate changes, protect our agriculture against imports, and creating an agricultural protein plan, because we are subject to volatility, especially in terms of proteins, and we need to allow agricultors to cope with unexpected situations from a climate point of view. We need to solve any climate issue which are inevitable. Thank you.
Mulțumim, domnule Moreau.
Thank you, Mr. Moreau. Next is Mr. Martin Preineder of the Federal Council of Austria, Mr. Jerzy Kienkowski of the Polish Senate should prepare. Mr. Reiner, you have the floor.
Thank you for the organization. Thank you for the floor. That's why German is not translated in this conference. I give the words to my assistant for the Austrian message.
Bonjour, je me permets de parler au nom du président de la Commission de l'Agriculture.
First of all, we believe that the challenges we will be confronted with will require immediate reactions from our part. We've seen important topics approached here, such as maintaining population in rural areas, climate change, environmental impacts. All these things impact significantly on the farmer's livelihood, and these are significant challenges. Yet another challenge we see is related to the food chain and the need to safeguard the quality of foodstuffs in Austria. That is an important topic, at least in our country. It will be difficult to meet all these challenges, considering that the financial means will be reduced. There is a consensus in Austria between the parliament and the government as not to reduce the current allocations, but rather keep them at the same level. This request has already been put through to the European Commission, and we hope that other parliaments will support our position. Moreover, I'd like to thank the Romanians, for the wonderful conference they have organized for us and for inviting us to attend. Thank you. Now I pass the floor to Mr. Jerzy Kienkowski of the Polish Senate, and then the representative of Ireland, please.
I chciałbym w imieniu polskich delegacji tutaj wyrazić stanowisko głównie postulaty do budżetu. Za chwilę pozwolę sobie tłumaczenie przekazać mojej tłumaczy.
Thank you very much for organizing this meeting.
Przełącz sobie. Teraz ty przełącz.
Okay. Thank you very much for organizing this meeting. I think it's very important to discuss the issues concerning the future of the CAP. I would like to present the Polish opinion on the proposal of the Commission. Poland's goal in the negotiations on the CAP is ensuring adequate level of the CAP budget. Poland is against the cuts proposed by the Commission. The proposed cuts are higher than the UK's input in the CAP. We also oppose the concentration of the cuts in the second pillar. Second pillar is supposed to limit the disparities between the rural areas in EU. So it is very crucial that the budget for it remains at the current level. In Poland, we still have needs for modernization of farms, innovations, and development of rural economy. In the case of the CAP budget's reduction, Poland calls for no reductions in the second pillar for member states with direct payment rates lower than the EU average. Moreover, there is lack of balance between the ambitious environmental goals for the future CAP and the proposed CAP budget. New environmental goals mean higher costs for farmers. We also have to remember that the competition on the global market is growing, so we need strong CAP and high budget for this policy. Poland calls for equal direct payment rates and expects that the possible rate of transfers between pillars will remain at the current level of 25% and not the proposed by the Commission of 15%. Thank you.
Da, vă mulțumim mult.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pat Deering next from the Irish Chamber of Representatives, and Mr. Stantsikas from the Lithuanian Parliament should prepare next.
Thank you, Chairperson, and I'd like to thank you very much for your kind invitation to Romania and Bucharest here today, and your hospitality likewise. I suppose, first of all, I'd like to make the point that we in Ireland are very much against any reduction in the MFF. I think it's now more important than ever that that budget is maintained at its present level at the very least. I think it's also important to remember, I suppose, the original objectives of CAP. I think they haven't changed over the years. And there's 5 key points I think that have to be made. First is to increase agricultural production and productivity. Secondly, to ensure a fair standard of living for the agricultural community. Thirdly, to stabilise markets. Fourthly, to ensure the availability of supplies. And fifthly, to ensure the supplies reach consumers at a reasonable price. I think there are the 5 key points of CAP that haven't changed over the years and must be maintained as we move forward as well. In the context of Ireland, agriculture is our largest indigenous industry. 8% of our employment in Ireland is involved in the agriculture sector. It is a key part of our industry and it's something that we must maintain. There are a number of challenges we will see over the next number of years. I suppose firstly, the one that has been mentioned indirectly over the last period of time is Brexit. And because we are closely associated and our nearest neighbours, Great Britain, are now deciding to leave, unfortunately, we have potentially most to lose in that regard. They're our main trading partners. 40% of our exports from the beef sector go to Great Britain on an annual basis, and it's something that must be remembered as we move forward. The other key points, I think, in the discussion here today are the young farmers issue. I think it's a key point that must be made and must not be forgotten. Over 1,000 farmers per week leave agriculture within Europe. That is something that must be addressed if we're to make sure that agriculture is sustainable for the future. If young farmers are willing to come back in Ireland, and I presume likewise in other European countries, to farm in Europe if they have a sustainable income for the future. They are also, the other key issue is the environmental issue, and they are the custodians, will be the custodians of the agriculture land for the future. But they must be in a position where they will have a sustainable income for the future as well. The old saying that we have in Ireland is that you cannot go green if you're in the red. I think it's very, very important. Farmers of tomorrow must have a sustainable future. The question I would ask here today as well is, in the event that, and you're very learned panellists, I would ask the question, in the event that no deal is completed by the end of this particular year, as probably ambitious in that regard, what is the plan for the future? Will there be funding going forward at the same level in 2020 and beyond? I think it's an important question, if we could have that addressed here today as well. But finally, I'd like to wish Romania every success in the rest of your presidency, and thank you very much again.
Da, vă mulțumim, domnule Deering. Noi avem mare încredere în dumneavoastră,
Thank you, Mr. Deering. We are very confident because you are so close to Commissioner Owen. We now pass the floor to Mr. Andrejus Stancivskas from Lithuania, and the next speaker is Mr. Sándor Font from the National Assembly of Hungary.
Kolegoms iš Rumunijos už šiltą priėmimą ir gerai organizuotą konferenciją. Grįžtant prie mano pasisakymo dėl bendrosios žemės ūkio politikos finansavimo mažinimą, mes pasisakom už tai, kad tai yra mums nepriimtina. Mes suprantame, kad Europos Sąjungos laukia įvairūs nauji iššūkiai, kas liečia klimatą.
Let me first of all take the opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to our colleagues from the Romanian Parliament for the excellent organization of the conference and for their hospitality. As for my intervention, I would like to focus on the ambitions to reduce the funding for the Common Agricultural Policy. This is absolutely unacceptable. We are aware of the new challenges that Europe is facing. However, the traditional goals of the Common Agricultural Policy established in the treaties of the EU have not been denounced. Everyone is interested in high-quality food for a reasonable price, while farmers want to live on a dignified income. This comes at a certain price. While we are trying to focus on greater environmental ambitions, we are at the same time cutting drastically funds for rural development. Lithuania has the highest immigration rates in the EU, and the immigration from rural areas is particularly high. The direct payments policy does not help to contain the situation either. The European Commission is proposing an increase in direct payments for Lithuania, thus reaching 79% of the EU's average in the new financial period. The farmers of the Baltic states, the farmers of the Visegrad countries, the farmers of Romania are all in favor of just and equal common agricultural policy. And we hope that the suggestions that were put forward by the countries that have already expressed their opinions today will be definitely listened to. Thank you.
Da, vă mulțumim și noi.
Thank you, sir. And we have the last speaker, Mr. Font from the National Assembly of Hungary.
Let me express my views about this topic with putting emphasis on the dialogue among member states and the EU institution. I would like to underline that during the Hungarian V4 presidency in the last year, when we held a successful meeting of the Committee on Agriculture of the V4 parliaments, I am convinced that such meetings do contribute to find the best possible solution for our common future. With regard to the budget on the common agriculture policy, Hungary's opinion that the reaching an agreement of the next MFF should be the precondition of a political agreement with the European Parliament on the regulation of the common agriculture policy. We don't support the decrease of the CAP budget. The proposed severe cut of the rural development allocation is particularly worrisome. In order to defend traditional policies, at least the present level should be maintained. We cannot demand more from our farmers for less. We identified two opinions to handle the cut proposed by the Commission. First, in order to increase the global MFF selling, we are ready to increase our GNI-based contribution. And second, if it is not possible, we need to transfer money for the traditional policies from other areas of the MFF proposal. In general, we are not against the continuation of the process of the external convergence, but we can only accept if it will be financed by those member states whose direct payment level is above the EU average, as it is right now. We think that is neither logical nor fair to force those member states to finance the convergence of those who are below the 19%, whose direct payments are also below the average. Fairer distribution of subsidies can be an important tool for Hungary. In terms of the reduction of higher amounts of payments, we prefer giving member states the maximum flexibility possible, where accepting a certain level of obligatory redistribution, member states would have the possibility to set their thresholds, reduction rates, and deduct the cost of labor. Reducing of payments should only apply to basic income support for sustainability. Otherwise, it would weaken the effectiveness of coupled income support, aiming at helping labor-intensive sectors and also of the eco-scheme. It is of utmost importance to retain the current European Agriculture Fund for Rural Development contribution rate and the maximum union co-financing rate in rural development. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vă mulțumim, domnule Font.
Thank you, Mr. Font. Are there other 4 speakers who want to take the floor? Otherwise, I'd invite Director Poisler to say a few words in the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you, Director.
With a very easy task now to address some of the issues which have been raised here, because I believe you deserve that from the Commission's point of view. I hope I'm able to cover most of the points which have been raised and also be able to give you some arguments in the respect. Let's first treat the general issue of the size of the budget. Now, when I listen to this room, I think everybody here who has spoken has said that you are opposed to reductions in the CAP. Now, I can be very honest with you, of course, representing the agricultural part of the European Commission. I'm very pleased to hear that. But on the other hand, I also need to tell you that when we are sitting in a similar context in Brussels with the finance ministers, many ministers of those countries who have spoken here today who are against a reduction see that slightly differently. And I think this is exactly the kind of conflict we have here. Whilst understanding the sectoral interests of the agricultural sector, if you speak then to the finance ministers, and it's the finance ministers who, you are aware of that, it's the finance ministers who discuss and decide or propose then to the heads of states the future MFF. Of course, they have different views, particularly when it comes to net payer countries. And I would just, as an example, Mr. Tarico, you said the net payer would see the increase of the co-financing in a more difficult way than the non-net payers. It's actually the contrary. For the net payers, the increase of the co-financing rate is cheaper than paying into the budget in the EU in order then to redistribute it among all 27 member states. And this is one of the arguments which is on the table, obviously. Your finance ministers calculate that in very great detail, and that's the reason also why this is on the table. But also to speak more generally, because a number of delegates have spoken about co-financing, I think that's one of the great achievements already in the proposal of the Commission, because there was a lot of discussion before the proposal was made to introduce co-financing in the first pillar, to introduce co-financing of direct payments, and that has been rejected. And there's a very strong position of the Commission not to go into this direction, for the very reasons some of you have actually explained here, because that would actually really be a big danger for the common agricultural policy, to separate those member states who want and can afford to finance direct payments and those ones who cannot. On a more technical issue, you were one delegation was saying, I believe it was Mrs. Fontini from Greece, the difference between current and constant. Just to make this point very clearly, the MFF is presented in constant euros. That means nothing else than that we freeze the budget when the proposal is made. There's a reference date. But of course, the current figures are relevant for the farmers because this is what they actually will get. So for the first time ever, we have made a proposal where we show both figures, full transparency. There's not misleading or any kind of intention behind it. It's just to show what is the cost to the finance minister, but also to show what will actually the farmer, for the direct payments in particular, get when the direct payment is paid. A few of you were talking about the relative share of the common agricultural policy is decreasing, and that is a problem. I would just give you for your consideration, I don't think that's a problem per se. As long as the total budget is big enough, I don't think we should focus too much what is the share now of the common agricultural policy in it. Because some of you might remember, we come from a situation in the 70s and 80s when the common agricultural policy actually represented 80% of the union budget, or community budget, what it was called at the time, which was a very, very weak spot for the common agricultural policy because everybody was pinpointing on the agricultural policy and say all Brussels money is spent on the CAP. So I think we should not be concerned too much about what's the percentage of the CAP, as long as, of course, the total budget is large enough. Now, a few words on the direct payments, because that was one of the main contributions most of you made in your interventions. Again, to repeat, one of the prime objectives of Commissioner Hogan in this debate was to protect the direct payments, for the very simple reason because he considers that the direct payments is, to a certain extent, the backbone of European agriculture in many areas. Farmers need direct payments, and they need a certain planification that these direct payments will continue for a foreseeable future and not being at risk permanently in every budget discussion. So that's kind of the philosophy behind the proposal, and that's the reason why the direct payments are relatively untouched in this proposal. Now, on capping and digressivity, I don't add any more, because you had here in this room exactly the opposite positions. You had a number of delegations who said they are completely against capping and digressivity for good reasons, and you had other delegations who said that's essential and we need to do that. And I think this is where the debate stands at the moment in the Council of Agricultural Ministers. This is the debate where it stands at the moment in the European Parliament, and as far as we are talking today, I would not be able to say in which direction this is exactly going when a decision is taken. Another element of the direct payments which deserves maybe a few words. What are the conditions under which the farmers get direct payments? And a number of you have said, if there is a budget cut, we cannot expect from farmers to deliver public services. We cannot expect from farmers to enhance their environmental performance, etc., etc., etc. Now, to this, let me only say that I think we also need to see this in a wider context. The European Union is one of the drivers of the climate change policy worldwide. We have been behind the driver of the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, which have been decided in the Paris conference. Now, we have firm commitments, and the common agricultural policy will have to deliver on these commitments. And this will have to happen through rural development, of course, as it does already, but it will also have to happen through the direct payments and through the environmental and climate change obligations, which are part of our direct payments policy. Maybe to make, also to mention shortly, and again, not to add anything else, convergence of direct payments. Again, I think you had here in the room those ones who strongly defend it and who ask for an even higher convergence, and you also had delegations expressing their concern that convergence, the proposal which we made, is going too far. I believe we have made a good proposal which is kind of trying to find a balance between the two. I don't think that we could seriously consider to decide a reform on the common agricultural policy without going further in the convergence of the direct payments. I think that's simply not conceivable. But of course, there will be the details to be discussed, how far this is going and how much and who is actually going to finance it. One sentence to simplification. Yes, we have understood the message some of you have expressed. Simplification is not about making life easier for public administrations or the European Commission. Simplification is about making life easier to the farmer. Now, this has led to this proposal, a proposal which is, with the change of the delivery model, without entering into detail here now, trying to give more room to the member states. And I hear the concern, I think mainly Mr. Plagge expressed it, but not only, that this is dangerous to a certain extent, because if you leave too much leeway to member states, indeed there is a risk of a race to the bottom, but I think this is part of this policy, and this is part of the future role of the Commission when accepting the national strategic plans of the member states, that we make sure that there is no race to the bottom. Again, coming back to what I said before on our driving role in the international climate change policy and environmental policy. On Brexit, let me just say two things. First of all, it's not the farmers who pay for Brexit. I don't want to be misunderstood. I just said the fact, not discussing now all the difficulties we have with the withdrawal agreement with the United Kingdom at the moment, the fact that the UK in the next MFF is not part of the European anymore, I think that's a given, is simply a huge challenge to the budget, because we lose 90+ billion euros over the period, which is a lot of money. And of course, everybody will have to contribute to a certain extent to fill this hole because of the UK leaving. Maybe a more side remark to Brexit. Yes, we know that in the event, and that's not linked now to the MFF, that's a more common agricultural point from today, in the event that the UK leaves without an agreement, the Union, there's a huge change and a huge challenge for the agricultural markets, in particular for some member states, and rest assured we are prepared for that. We are prepared for that in the event that happens. We will be ready and we'll be there to intervene on the markets in order to make sure that the interests of our farmers are protected, because certainly they cannot bear the blame for political decisions which are taken in a completely different context. Now, let me come to an end. The proposal is on the table, and as I said, at the moment, I think it's fair to say it is not possible to say where everybody stands. Some of you have mentioned the European Parliament. The European Parliament has decided not to finish the first reading, in other words, not to adopt a position on this reform in this Parliament period until April. That's a political decision we have to respect from the European Parliament. That means, indeed, that the new European Parliament has swiftly to come to a position in order to be able to start the negotiations with the Council of Ministers, who is ready and who is prepared to do these negotiations at present under the Romanian presidency. And then let's see, we won't have a lot of time to do it. Now, a very final word on what's happening if there is no MFF. That's a technical question. There is a technical solution to this. There's a solution to everything in the European Treaty. It means that we would continue with the provisional 12th of the last budget year. So, with other words, the basis would be the current MFF, and we would use every month a provisional 12th of the last year of the current MFF, which I can assure you is not going to happen, because that is going to be tremendously expensive, because the current MFF includes the UK. So I don't think member states are willing to go this direction. So I think that the risk is relatively limited. Sorry to have a bit long, but I tried to cover as much as I could.
Vă mulțumim mult, domnule director.
Thank you, engineers filled by you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this interesting debate. And I wish to thank the four speakers for their point of view, as well as our colleagues from the national parliament.